when you run a given script, you will find, if you look, that you actually have several variables that have been set for you already. This collection of variables that are preset are known as your environment. You can think of these variables as being inherited from the login shell. In other words, you'll find these same variables have been set in the login shell and simply inherited into any script that login shell starts. I'll show you some examples of those variables. They include the variable called home in capitals. These are all case sensitive, so the fact that they're capitals is significant. Path is another one. Log name and term, and they represent in turn your home directory, a list of directories in which to search for command names, the person who's currently logged in to this particular shell session, and the terminal type that you're currently using. In other words, all of that information is available to you in your shell script. Usually. There's no guarantee that any of those variables is going to be set in a given shell script, but usually you'll find that most of them are. Whether they are or whether they're not is not really important to this particular module. The point is that there exists a collection of some preset environment variables. And let's look at what that means to us. Firstly, it's very important to note that you can actually make changes to any of these variables in a shell script, but the changes that you make will only have a duration of the length of the script. In other words, when the script finishes, the changes that you've made will disappear. The login shell that caused these environment variables to exist, as well as any subsequent shell scripts that you call using that script, will see the original values of those variables, not the changed values. Now, if you think back to the previous chapter, you'll remember that it is actually possible for any changes that you make to an environment variable to persist when you run a shell script, but you have to invoke the shell script using the dot operator. Remember the old dot space dot profile? Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. Here is a small shell script called test1 that I've just written, which sets the variable called home to be some garbage value xyz. Now let's first examine the real variable called home, which is set to /home1/mvirtue. And now what I'll do is I'll run the script. I haven't bothered to make it executable. sh test1, and it runs, so it's obviously changed the value of home to be xyz. So let's now look at the value of home again, and it has not actually changed. Let's go back into test1 and prove that it did actually change it, and do an echo of $home here. So notice that we're actually echoing out home at this point, and we'll run test1 again, and it does in fact change it to xyz, but when we examine home again, we still find that it has not been changed at all. The only way that we're ever going to successfully change the value of home using that script is if we use the dot variable. Instead of running test1 using sh, we run test1 using dot. And so we do it like this. And again it claims that it's changed it to xyz. And now let's see if it indeed has. Echo $home, and this time it really is xyz. Let's now take a word about creating new variables and adding them to the existing environment, which is possible to do. If you create a new variable, that variable will not be available or visible to other programs, including any other shell scripts that you may write, unless you add that variable to the environment. Now there's a very particular way of doing that. You add it to the environment using the export command as follows. You can say month equals January or any value like that, and then you simply say export month. Now what happens at that point is the variable called month is added to the environment, and what that means is that any subsequent program that is started by this particular shell will know of the existence of the variable called month. Now let me tell you what that does not mean. If you put those two lines into a shell script and you run that shell script in the normal way, not using the dot operator, the variable called month will be added to the environment of the shell script that is running, but it will not be added to the login shell environment, which means that any subsequent shell scripts that you run will not know of the existence of the month variable. If you want to add the month variable to the environment of the login shell, you actually have to run those two lines, you have to enter those two lines into the login shell's prompt. Or, if they are in a script, you have to run that script using the dot operator, which will cause any statements in that script, of course, remember, to be executed by that login shell, which will mean, of course, that the month variable will be added to the environment of that login shell. I know this is very confusing, but let's have a look at an example. Hopefully that will make things clearer. So here's a very small script that sets the value of month to July and then adds it to the environment of whatever shell happens to be running this code. So let's run this. I'll just do an sh of set month. Okay, now theoretically that's been added to the environment. So let's look at what month is set to. Echo $month. It's not set to anything, because it has only been added to the environment of the shell script that just ran. It has not been added to this login shell's environment. And I've got another program called test month. I'll just show you what that looks like. In test month, I've simply got a line of code that says echo $month, and if I run test month, it does not know anything about the value in month. So if I actually want it to be set and added to the environment, and I want to do that using the set month script, then I have to run the set month script using the dot operator, like so. Now I can do echo $month, and I find that's actually set to July. And if I run any other script like test month, which is got to be run this way, test month, it's also knows it now to be set to July. So the importance of the environment is significant. If you add a variable to the environment of a given shell, then that variable will be available to any script that is run from that shell onwards. And remember, of course, that that has all been done using the export command.